Everyone's born with an oil well. Some think it'll make them rich. Others find it messy. And still others believe the noise of its running will drive them crazy. Everyone's born with an oil well. What are you doing with yours? Remembering that reality is mental. In this one universe, there are two realities possible. The first is one in which you take life seriously and everyone else doesn't. And in the other, everyone else takes life seriously and you do not. There is always this third one, but, well, no. The game of thinking as ordinarily performed. Handball played in a fishnet. One man wrote a new singing dance he titled Define Yourself, but could find no public stage that could accommodate the act. As she dusted behind the rocks, Plato's girlfriend thought, worthy of note regarding hand shadows is that if you almost close your eyes and let awareness sag, they and the walls upon which they're shown begin to merge. A wandering hermit passing by was heard to sing, "The caves of the mind I must leave behind. Their fires of discussion will render me blind." The enlightened no longer believe in avalanches, only in properly greased rock formations. "Look out below," he shouted to himself from on high, but then realized history, prepackaged collective corpse maggots. A man pondered, then is memory a man's history of his individual self? And was suddenly struck, ordinary memory in large part constitutes his ordinary self, his individual self. While routine minds have little interest in hearing birth described as the primary cause of men being what they are, the alert few continue to rediscover the possibility of being reborn in a certain non-physical fashion which frees them internally from the restraints of their original delivery. Before he'd get up every morning, one man would lay in bed until he'd planned out everything he was going to say that day. The challenge, human problems. The approach, the human mind. The full story from a different view. It won't work, but men got to try. And their failures produce new problems to work on. More hot flashes from the gym. What'll wear you out faster than even stupidity? Two-dimensional talk. Conversation by the lat machine. It's not what you know, but how you know it. How can that be? What? Sweat chucka-lucka-lucka, sweat chucka-lucka-lucka. On this one world, so as to be sure that the ordinary creatures don't get their ears hurt or their eyes harmed, life sees to it that anyone who turns up knowing more than is normal are always ugly and annoying. And if that's not sufficient, makes them not care that they are. After surveying their efforts post their founder's death, the consultant the disciplines had hired told them, "I believe you'd do better with this thing if you'd wipe that silly grin off Buddha's face." There's only one way that men will take their singular mental world seriously. Life makes them. A ha-ha update. Comedy is perhaps the worst form of humor. Mystical knowledge. A hole punched in a closed system balloon that lets all the people out. That lets all the seriousness out? Mental health and safety at sea. Originality is frightening. Part of what motivated men to come up with the idea of insanity. In oceans controlled by Philistines, only uniform waves are allowed. In his struggle to comprehend, one man so reflected, if individual creativity is the maypole, and the collective's expectations the 5th month of their year, then what I should do is grease the ribbon I've been wrapping with.
No.
Under the influence of local reality, one guy's mind whispered to him, "Psst, want me to tell you something really neat?" "No," he replied. There is at least one thing you can say for talk. It does make life seem more complicated and serious than it would otherwise be. Breakthroughs in neurology and numismatic reliability. One man named his right brain Peter and his left brain Paul so that he'd always be sure of having the correct change. Aristotle's papa said to him, "Okay, hold it. Let me get this straight. If you're my son and I'm your old man, then how can you be the father of logic?" A system knows what a system knows, while its parts know what is appropriate to them. The mind of the awakened is unappropriate. One man decided that he would never again sing any song that he did not write. Movement that doesn't actually go anywhere can give the illusion of doing so. Just look at thought. In his effort to understand, a man so mused, if the mind is a frying pan, then consciousness is Teflon. And he was pleased, until a fried egg suddenly showed up and said, "Where do I fit in?" Looking out upon the world of humanity's common creative efforts, a voice rhetorically pondered, which is the most pathetic, man's fiction or his non-fiction? And suddenly appeared the spirit of no scribe's past, which responded, "There's a difference?" The gleam of a distant star once stopped and asked itself, what is the distinction between the serious and the frivolous, between the comedic and the comprehended, between the opening of the door and the closing of all conversation? Incompetence normally comes gift-wrapped.
No.
Unusually poignant piles of shit can seem heroic to routine flies. What ho! The relativity of admirability if you live on dung.
No.
Dialogue by the steam room. The way you can tell the smartest man in the world is that he won't admit it. Are you sure of that? Well, maybe. The 3D world examined again. Everything goes in cycles, especially buys. Wilbur's girlfriend looked at Orville and said, "You'll never get that thing off the ground," and his head took immediate offense.
No.
From above, a man shouted to himself, "Look out below," then wondered why the lower parts never returned the favor. Even in closed systems, there seems to be ups, downs, beginnings, and completions, but only to those with minds similar to the system in which they operate. "Yes," said the bag to the cat, "there is always a way out, but if you seek it through me, you miss the point." In the In the transcendentalists' thesaurus, the antonym for aging is creating. And local reality said, watch it, bub, I was here first. Those who can't think good have little interest in hearing of other possibilities. Though fish got to swim and birds got to fly, does that mean they can only make squishing and flapping sounds? In a certain strange forest, one species of tree was made to believe they could walk. You know, so as to keep them where they're at. The awakened, those who grease up their own oil wells. The place for originality in the human mind clearly pinpointed. Nowhere. Upon being hurled from atop the monastery wall, a voice cried out after him as he fell. When you can no longer hear yourself think, you're getting somewhere.
No.
To try and change, the simple paint their face. The more complex wipe off their mind. One man who finally realized that no one knows what they're talking about never mentioned it. You can act without thinking and think without acting. Both done together, the way of the mystic. By the way, there were 3 tonight that constituted a sub-series within there. I guess I could, after the fact, entitle them The Impossible Man. In case you thought you misunderstood, there were 3. Had no intro. The first one was, there was one man who every morning would lay in bed until he had absolutely planned out each and everything he was going to say that day. Back to some of, we're talking about men trying to change their state of consciousness, and that it is not that foreign, even though it can be quite off-putting to people to hear ideas about, that appear to be serious ideas about potential other states of consciousness and mysticism and transcendental experience and all that kind of stuff that we're wont to use around here just to annoy the civilians who may accidentally find their cable converter stuck on this station. But it can be worthwhile, I submit to you, or I would not be talking about it, to consider in a certain way, without it removing the enthusiasm and the joy and the excitement, because if that's gone, it's gone anyway. But from the idea of doing something extraordinary and thinking, as all weekend drugstore would-be mystics do, that it's something so far away. And then the mind always, of course, puts it so far away spatially, if not temporally, that only people could reach another state of consciousness, only people could actually experience a real rebirth beyond a physical one 2,000 years ago, 500 years ago. And they can only do it now, if it's being done, they can only do it somewhere other than where I am. They can only do it 4,000 miles from here in a probably inaccessible place. But now you've got to understand, I know how interesting that is, that the world is full of variations, flying saucers, Atlantis. All ideas of religion being founded around some supernatural being, and them thinking at least we've gone past the pagan days of Greeks believing in those mythological gods. That was a little extremely wry humor. Plus it was completely my opinion that that's what it was. I know how exciting And I know how people's mind hates to relinquish the idea, and in fact they will not directly. You cannot take a would-be, a person interested in ideas such as this, and immediately confront them with the fact to say, well, do you actually believe that people have reached some sort of extraordinary state? And yes. And they may have all sorts of second-hand reading information about it and begin to quote you words from Buddha, Muhammad, or Plotinus. And you say, yeah, but have you got any idea that it's an actual experience? Oh, yes, I believe it. I'm trying to save up money to go join up with some secret caravan, to join up with some guru somewhere. And then if I said, but you don't know that all of that is just dreams, that all of that is just extremely second-hand smoke. That won't begin to give you the kind of lung cancer you're looking for. I don't care what the EPA says or whoever's in charge of it. That is second-hand. It is not far away and it's not long ago. If you did that and it could have an effect to somebody immediately, you would have taken all the wind out from under there. Who does the wind get under? Bette Midler? It would take all the wind out of their sails. Pardon the... If by the time you begin to have your own hormones begin to wear down, the rattling of the train, the closer you get to the Swiss border, begins to sort of wear you out, you're more inclined to be able to hear it, but you've got to see it for yourself, is the reason I was using it. As mysterious as it seems, after a certain point, to try and reach this other state, to try and actually affect the purpose of what's always been called some great secret work or activity. To do it, you've got to get past the point of believing it somewhere else. And you've got to actually get past the point of believing it's all that strange. It's just almost not strange at all. But as everything within a closed system, everything within a limited universe, at least our perception, our normal perception thereof, everything can turn back on itself, and I can say, well, it's almost not weird at all, but at the same time, it's almost so weird that people won't even entertain it. Everybody, I refer you back to my offhand description of creation again from last time, that very easily, and not with doing any insult to the reality of it, could I say, to take the story of Adam and Eve, that as soon as man was created, and as soon as the gods made him conscious, the first thing he did, just within minutes, was try to change his consciousness. And we've been doing it ever since. That is what makes man so irritable, so annoying, so unsatisfied, that the more you are conscious in the ordinary sense, that is, the more you are driven and that your life orients around the world of the mind as opposed to the body, the less satisfied you can be. The less satisfying that good old first-class physical activities, sex, food, the less likely, the less is the ability for you to get through with a good bout in bed and just collapse, as opposed to if you were a hippo. I shouldn't bring in animals because they got their own way of handling things. For those of you who never watched National Geographic. For all the waitresses and barflies and Texas and Oklahoma roadhouses that complain about men that just do it and get up and leave. At least the men have to take long enough to pull on their clothes and their boots and leave, whereas animals just, but that's another story. We'll be getting into the very important area of sexual mores. I have that scheduled for us. I believe I have it written in, if I'm not mistaken, in March. Sometime in the next century, that is. March of 2907, I believe it is. Man is absolutely dissatisfied, as everyone knows. If you are sane, you're dissatisfied. If you're not dissatisfied in some way, you are clinically psychotic. So everyone is dissatisfied. But the dissatisfaction is on the basis of man's consciousness. It is at the intellectual level. It is at, drawing my diagram and this imaginary line, to where from here down, to speak in absolutes, would be the world of the body, and from here up would be the world of mind. And of course, there is no such absolute discrete distinction. But there is enough that can be described, and there is enough that you can see it for yourself, not take my verbal pictures of it, but you absolutely can see it in operation. So the more we are dealing with civilized people, which is all we're dealing with here, and all of you are, by and large, your life is centered around the mind, then the less likely, the less able you are to be satisfied. And not just physically. It doesn't mean that that in some way something's wrong with you if you do enjoy sex and can fall asleep, or that you do enjoy a good meal, or that you can go out and run and feel so good that you can come back and collapse. I don't mean that that's not possible, but that alone will not do it. Not if you're civilized. Nowadays, not if you're just minimally human. So what are people trying to do? I ran through a short list. Well, hell, it was long enough, but everything that people do. I started out last time with examples. I was saying watching movies, watching TV, listening to the radio, listening to records, listening to the symphony, reading. I can keep looking off like I'm trying to think of other examples, but what else do you want? When you look at the world of the mind, to use the distinction again for operational purposes, of thinking about just the mind or speaking of it by itself, of trying to feed and nourish it as opposed to the body, there is nothing that humans can do that in some way is not an attempt to affect consciousness. And when I keep saying an attempt, I don't mean that it doesn't work. It does work. You got to understand when I say that to watch a movie is an attempt to change consciousness. I don't mean it's an attempt that you may go to a movie and it doesn't work. Hell yeah, it'll work. But the attempt, I mean in another sense, that the change that everyone would say, all same people would say that they are favoring, is a positive change. And that is by no means any kind of foregone conclusion. That was sort of a humorous understatement, if I may say so. They're all attempts to change consciousness. They all succeed insofar as if you keep doing it, it is working on you. If you go to a movie and you sit there for the full length of the movie, it changed your consciousness. Nowadays, knowing the level at which people operate, it's hard to imagine someone actually getting up and walking out of a movie. But nowadays, with all the many channels, you can sit with TV and lose interest and just hit the clicker and you just go on and on and on and on and on, which is its own form of watching one show, is just 1 second after the other. It does change consciousness, or you would not do it, using you in the colloquial sense. It changes consciousness. That's the only reason people do it. It is not the content. The content is the secondary world of a secondary world. It is the fake Cool Whip on top of the fake chocolate. The content at the basic level is irrelevant. When people have the need, when people suddenly think, I want to hear some music, they don't hear music for a specific reason, but like everything else at the ordinary level, if you ask a person why they're doing something, another definition of sanity, any sane person has a reply. But by now you know they make up the reply, they make it up. I must apologize. I know that there have been people who have stopped me in the Kroger again and seem to think that this is some sort of comedy show, and I've been trying to stop that. But sometimes the inadvertent, overwhelming humor of life inadvertently overwhelms even me. If you ask any person, any sane person, why they do something, you know they have an answer. Conversely, if a person does not have an answer for what they're doing, they may not be clinically psychotic, but they are professionally, or they are dangerously neurotic. You know that. Think about it. Whatever somebody's doing, you go, what in the world are you doing that for? And of course they have no idea. But they go, if they go, well, I don't know, you will take 3 or 4 steps away from them, even if they're distantly related to you. That is not part of the sane fishnet structure of collective civilization. That somebody's doing something, you can say, how in the world can you listen to music like that? They go, well, I kind of like it. Well, I can't even understand the words. Are they speaking English? Can you understand it? Maybe the person even goes, well, no.
So you almost got them, right? You got them cornered. You go, but you claim to like music. Oh, I love music. And you look around, they got all these CDs, and you go, well, but you're listening to something, and you don't know what they're saying. Well, no. And you give them a look. Well, how the hell can you do that? Any sane person, that is any ordinary person, there they are. There is no, quote, logical answer. They've already, but they will say something. They will not say, well, I don't know. I just got no idea. I just do it. Everything they're doing, what I was trying to get you to consider is the content, which is the same thing as an explanation. If you say, why do you read that trash? Why do you listen to that junk? Why do you have such a dumb hobby? Why do you have a hobby that's so expensive and no one else even thinks it's worthwhile? No matter what you ask a person, sort of still down the mainstream of life, that they still, whatever they're doing, other sane people do. It is not the content. It is not the specific example. People do not read, speaking ordinarily, for any specific reason. People do not go to a movie. But you do know they will defend it. And I don't mean just entertainment. If you in the least slip in a tone of criticism in your voice, like, isn't that kind of movie about such and such, or a whole bunch of sex and violence, or whatever it is? And they go, well, yeah. And you look at them like, why in the world why would you go to see a movie like that? They will have an answer. And you can't say, I can just stand here and try to make it up. They can say, well, yeah, but so-and-so actor is one of my favorites. Just anything he's in always has an added touch. Which that doesn't answer anything, but you do know if we're talking about two ordinary people in a conversation, that will divert the conversation. If you go, how in the world can you read junk like that? You're standing there with somebody in line at a grocery store and you point out they picked up one of these so-called trash newspapers. And you go, how in the world can you read that stuff? And they go, but they have one of the best horoscope writers in the country. That almost makes too much sense. But you do understand that a sane person will give you an answer. They will give you an answer. The answer is irrelevant because the content of what they're doing is irrelevant. The effort is to change consciousness. If it were not, which is impossible, and I know I'm back to where we were talking about last time, the sentence is simple, but it makes your mind have to bend to even hear it. Everything a person does, by and large, to affect the mind is to change their consciousness. It is only after the fact that they will speak in terms of beneficial, positive, helpful, informative. That's all secondary. It's all explanations after the fact. What they are specifically attempting to do is change consciousness. And it is very easy. It's at least half of life, half the time, is for an outside observer to look at it and criticize it, to find reasonable, from their view, defendable fault with this other person, with what they're doing specifically, such as reading that kind of junk, listening to that kind of music, having such a dumb hobby, wasting your life. Everything, by and large, that a man does at that level to feed his intellect, that has anything to do with the intellect, is to change consciousness. And if you have any doubt, think about it this way. If that were not so, then that brief second that I made up that everyone has in the morning, it's almost like being reborn, that you've got a split second, about the same as when life created you and looked you dead in the eye, with that kind of unspoken, huh? How do you like it thus far? No, you've just been created. You've just been there for a second, and there you are. And then suddenly, the thing that created you yourself is looking at you and going, well, huh? How you like it thus far? And by the time you can think for a second, like to come up with some kind of answer, you're gone. You're down the assembly line and out of there. In the same way, in a sense, every morning you got that split second. And what do you do with it? You trash it. Now it's being crude to get your attention. You change it. And if that seems too much, I point out, there's other examples you can be just, it happens to people constantly. It's not important, it's not a criticism of humanity, they're not supposed to do otherwise, but people know this, they can hear it.
They can't carry it any further after that. But people know that there are times that they'll come in after you've just done some work you enjoy. You just completed a job that you know you could do. You did it, or you just got through exercising, or it can happen after sex. The good old thing about the blank mind. The point is, you can sort of sit down, you come in, and you sit down. And it is almost, maybe I should go with sex, but I just didn't want you to tie it to sex. But it's almost that feeling like after the full, whatever it be to you, the climactic experience, it's almost as though the mind is just... And what do people do? Ordinary people. Was it good for you? You got a cigarette? What time is it? The point is, even if you take away from sex, that you just get through doing a good job, or you got through running and exercising, and come in and sit down, stretch out, lay out on the rug, and just fall down. And it's almost like you're blank. And people cannot tolerate it. They're not supposed to. They will reach for something. They'll reach for a magazine. They'll reach over for the radio. They'll reach for the clicker on the TV. I'm just speaking out, of course, the modern conveniences to go along with this, because for years people did not have, believe it or not, remote controls on their TV. And it's reputed there have been civilizations before us that didn't even have TV. So, which is getting up to about where we left it last time. That surely you can get some glimpse. It is so blatant, it is so much a part of the mind, it's almost like a patina on the mind, and you try to look at it, or it's like you trying to see the soles of your own feet. It's so much a part of the mind to tell the mind, speaking of consciousness, but to tell the mind, do you realize that what you're doing constantly is you're trying your best to get away from just this ordinary state of consciousness. You're trying to change it. Well, can you be more specific? Nick just goes on and on. Well, I'm not being silly. It goes on and on. Zen literature is full of that. Zen masters just wearing out, if you can read a certain way. We've got some guy there and he talks to him once a week or whenever the student wants to, and like spends whatever it takes, 30 or 40 or 60 years, and he wears the mother out. Because they go through the same thing over and over and over, except they seem to keep talking about something else. It's what makes the Zen stories apparently reach even new heights of apparent irrationality. But it's the same thing over and over. I just did it in case you missed it. Here I go again. You're talking to the mind, or you hear me describe that everything that you normally do, of which the mind is a part, is right then an attempt to change your state of consciousness. Everything? What I say? That was the thing. So I was doing both parts. You're attempting to change your state of consciousness. Well, what do you mean by exactly state of... You see, the reason I stopped the sentence is after that it's unimportant. It's what makes the Zen stories, those of you who have read them, seem so silly. Irrational is a better word, and then makes many people wonder, correctly so, if there's not something more to it. Isn't there some secret behind it? Yeah, except the secret ain't behind it. It's right out in the open. No, but the stories, I have a book here, I have a collection, says a guy, of 10,000 of these little episodes between a Zen teacher and a student. And they're all about different things, about the sound of one hand, the sound of a one-legged man, the sound of a one-legged tap dancer with termites in his wooden leg, the sun feeding the clouds and what the clouds do, and asking the guy, what question do you have? See, I'm still talking for this other person. They say, it's like 10,000 different things that drives you crazy. No. It's about one thing. Here I go. I'm going to do the parts again. I'm talking to the guy. So you got to... He says, but this is like 10,000. They're always talking about different things. I mean, they don't even make sense. They talk about setting fires, putting out fires, where you get wood, whether you stay warm, whether you stay out in the sunshine, what an old man does when the clouds come over the roof of the mountain and the storks sit down and that makes no sense. It's just about the time you think they're getting somewhere. And it says here the student asks the teacher, what happens just before you get enlightened? And he goes, well, what happened before you thought it was right before he was going to get enlightened? And I think we're getting somewhere, and they keep changing it. It's all these different things. That's that guy talking. I go, no, it's not. And he goes, well, yes, it is. And see, there you are. See, any comment, well, let's try it this way. Maybe this will get some of you somewhere. Any comment you make on such a Zen story is a new Zen story.
Yeah.
Ah. And of course, any reasonable mind will go, wait a minute. No, wait. You must mean that allegorically. Okay.
Yeah.
Wait a minute, you're just putting me off. You mean that there's some other something to it. Yep. Wait a minute. In that case, it must be literal. Okay. It was in there somewhere tonight that they awakened. One guy shouted, "Look out below," to himself. But then it pointed out that the more awakened no longer believe in avalanches. Only in properly greased rock formations. Because every avalanche, as I believe it was Freud who said, every avalanche, what is it? It's sad individually, but each one is happy in its own way. Never mind. That was so obscure I got lost. As ordinary minds look at each avalanche as being unique. 10,000 Zen avalanches. Each one worthy, deserving of some specific analysis. There's not but one avalanche. There's not but one way up or down. It just looks like there are. There apparently, back to where we were, there apparently all of these ways that people ordinarily are affecting their consciousness without knowing it. They all amount to one thing. They come down to talk. Everything related to talk changes consciousness. Remember again, change. Ordinary people will say it's beneficial. They'll say that that's their intent. Change, you've got to start off and see that change is without quality to start with. At best. Before men had TVs, before they had radios, what did they do? As soon as they were conscious, they talked. All the creation stories normally say that creation, life, the God, said the first word. And that's always, in some way or the other, the logos, the word, once God said something to man, and man spoke. Well, of course, you heard it, but then replied. That was the beginning of real human creation. Until that point, you are nothing but, or we would be nothing but chimpanzees that probably needed additional hair replacements. It is only when man talks is he fully human, is he conscious. And so here's the trick. As soon as he's conscious, the first thing he does is attempt to change consciousness, which I've already said, but there's the proof, if you can see it. As soon as you talk, as soon as you entertain, as soon as you solicit the speech of others, which is all movies are, it's all TV is, it's all forms of reading, and any ordinary, sophisticated, educated man would put forth a proper, I would expect it if I was talking to him, a very proper defense, a highly agitated attack of that. That I do not read just to talk. I do not read just as entertainment. I do not read just to play around with my consciousness. Which, do you understand that an ordinary man can do that? By pointing out the specifics, by using examples, by saying, I read books on philosophy, I read some of the better fiction, I read history, I read all of the better works, I do not read trash. Therefore, I am not in the same category. What I do is not in the same category. It is. Not from an ordinary view, and from an ordinary view they're correct. That's why I slipped in last time with some of the things that people do, and I gave you as examples. If you recall, was weight loss programs and mandatory education. I did it real fast, and several of you I know that have had mandatory education. There were small gasps for air. It is all at the same level. It is men being driven to continue to irritate this unfinished piece up here. Consciousness cannot lay down and take a blank nap the same way the sex organs can after good sex, the same way that the stomach can lay down and go blank after a good meal. There is no similarity. I mean, there's enough similarity I can talk about it, but there's nothing in the mind save a different state of consciousness, which ordinary people cannot succeed at obtaining. But there is nothing that will satisfy the mind. There is nothing similar to that. And men refuse to see it as they're supposed to. But if you refuse to see it, if you do not see it, I don't mean it's going to be the wreck of all mystical hopes, but I'm going to tell you the truth. God damn, it sure can run you around different ways when you're trying to get from Paris to Istanbul. You can end up spending, as nice as it may seem, 40 years in Switzerland. Even in Rio. Don't ask me how you ended up. Don't ask me how you ended up in Brazil while on a train from Paris to Istanbul. But stranger things have happened in the world of the Neural Railroad. It just simply can distort and distract you because everything you're looking for is right here. Istanbul is right here. Shangri-La, Jerusalem, the Buddha mine, it's nothing new. But there are things that keep you from looking at it. Would you be more specific? I just thought I did. How about everything that you normally do to feed the mind? Well, wait a minute, you can't mean everything. Yeah, I guess you're right. God, it's great talking to me. Isn't it great talking to you? What I like is then people look off like, well, is it? Or do I? Which, of course, tells me all I need to know. It certainly doesn't tell you all you need to know, which I'm trying to do right this second. Well, let's try it real straight and simple, because this is getting very close. This is not having to do, as much as it may sound, with trying to make jokes and to criticize humanity and make fun of the entertainment field. But you guys, everybody that listens to this seriously, should be close enough now. You can sit around, you understand there are people out taking drugs, there are people out involved with dancing, with posturing, with meditating, with fasting, doing things with even the descriptions left. It's quite common in all sorts of Sufi practices. It may look to be different, like the kind of whirling dances. At one time in the Jewish mysticism, there was a similar dances, similar kind of physical movement. In the same way, it looks to be the opposite. You've got people now under the guise of Zen somewhere sitting. You've got Hindus, yogas, sitting in an immobile or standing in an immobile position, and it's all the same thing. And the words are left, the descriptions. The easiest one, perhaps, that I kept bringing up, it's not important, but is the kind of Zen descriptions of what we're trying to do is to calm the mind. If you calm the mind and get it still, it will suddenly, instead of being some sort of interference with a higher state of consciousness, it will then become a partner, or some descriptions, it will become a mirror and then not reflect distortions of the external world and your feelings and your moods. It will then, if it stops, then the reality that is the Buddhahood, that is the awakening of a higher level, then shines directly on you, and it's all these ripples breaking up the light waves. And it's like the light of a higher state of consciousness, of reality, can go through. If you looked at the mind here, being waves on a pond, and you're under it, it breaks up the light and you can't tell what's going on if you're underwater. But if it stops, it's like everything becomes clear. It's a beautiful description. But you do not have to go sit. You do not have to get up and dance. No offense to our fine Sufi friends and Jewish mystics and Zen people. You got friends in that? Well, anyway. You don't have to go anywhere. That is part of the safety mechanism of life. It is part of what I was trying to say. If you don't ever see past it, you can end up wasting or spending the rest of your life sitting there at the window and still, in a sense, be on the great mystical Orient Express and kind of bopping along, and at least, as I said, you're out of Paris. At least you got going. But if you do not ever see what's going on right in here, if you do not see that everything the mind normally does is literally, this is not the right word, but there is no word, it is a barrier, it is interference to another state of consciousness, to the very goal that you seek. And then the mind wants to go, yeah, but wait a minute, be more specific. It does. Why am I shouting at you? You got your own mind. All you had to do was stop if you had the ability and go, well, goddamn, you're right. But look how hard it is. I even go, well, come on, it does. What could be sillier in a sense? That's like shying a person and go, do you realize that you have your own foot? I'm serious. Well, most of you got two. And you think, well, God, that's why you hollering. It's bad enough that you even pointed out, but then, to want to shout about it, squeal, appear to be real sincere. All right, listen, I was going to try and make it more direct. Meditation, one of the oldest forms in the world, there's nothing wrong. The whole idea, and I'm sure that many people sitting here now and people that may see this at some other time have done it, may be trying to do it. You get close enough and you're just sure there's something there. And I'll give you more credit, speaking again of you colloquially, give you more credit than to think that it's actually the physical activity involved, or sitting in a certain position, or yoga somewhere standing in a certain position. I know that if you calm the body, they got explanations that it's easier to calm the mind. Yeah. Do not depend on that. Or any of you who do, then my question will be, well, how long have you been doing Zen practice? And God forbid that you go, well, 30 years. Because I wouldn't personally won't say anything after that, but I would be hoping that your own voice would go, well, you're right. If I've been sitting still 3 hours a day, every other day, for 30 years, and it hadn't stopped my mind. But with ordinary people, it seems to fit. The description fits. The sales pitch of it, that is, they describe about what I did with the calming the mind, and people go, yes. If nothing else, many people feel like their mind is driving them crazy anyway. And so they feel like, well, if I could just calm my mind anytime I want to, hell, I'll sign up. Even if I never experience any other kind of expanded state of consciousness, if you can do that, I'll buy that. So they can hear that, and then the rest of it seems to fit, and they say, well, how do I do it? And people who talk about this publicly do not know how to do it, or they would not be talking about it and trying to sell it, and squealing and being enthusiastic. And so all they can do is rehash the life of somebody who's already died and did it. That is, the meditation route. They say, here's what we do. They show you how to sit or how to stand, the classic thing being to sit and still the body. And it doesn't take any long metaphysical discussion or description. You go, they tell you, now the point is we're trying to calm the mind to let in higher influences or whatever they describe. And that, thus far, it strikes everybody to some degree to start with that has any interest in such matters is correct. Even if they don't see immediately where it's going, they say, well, up here. Used to they talk down here in your heart. In other words, what they're trying to do is differentiate it between that and the grossness, the mundane life of the body. And they say what we're trying to do is get in touch with higher influences. And you understand they're not physical. It's not going to suddenly make you grow a third eye, unless you believe that the virgin birth had something to do with actual virgin birth. And we were speaking about that, and I told you once you gain some kind of be able to see in a certain way that no matter how silly some aspect, some dogma, some belief in a religion may seem, like the virgin birth, you can see the reality of it, where it came from. But what struck me was, since we're in the area of the Far East and the Tibetans and certain forms of the Buddhists, the idea of a third eye. And people actually got all these diagrams, and they believe, they'll sit around and they'll look at each other like, if you meditate long enough, you actually begin to develop a third eye here. And they can find these drawings from Tibet and India that they swear hundreds of years old that show Buddha or somebody that looks like Buddha with this third eye. And you say, wow, people from another planet are. But how about this? What do I keep talking about? The dual nature of the. Nobody liked the guy the other night that when he first heard this new breakthrough, the theories of the left brain and the right brain, he went, great God Almighty, now my chances are doubled. Everybody's got two eyes. That is, you've got a brain, you've got a neural system run by polarized forces. What you need is some way out of that cul-de-sac, off that merry-go-round. And what would be one way to describe it? Instead of these two eyes dancing the tango forever, you develop like a third partner. That's not necessarily a good description of awakening, but at least imagine how that would interfere to the point to give you the chance to see something else. That was all one term. If you had a third partner involved with this dance. Or every time your brain goes, well, I can agree with some of that, but not that much. And that's only two possibilities. Or somebody says, do you think so-and-so is true? Well, yes or no, right? What if you had an equally adamant, stalwart third opinion? What if everybody else now up to the point of, I'm a man with two brains? What if you had three? Whereas where everybody else sees, well, on the one hand, such and such is true, and on the other hand, such and such is true, which at least will get you into law school. But what if you had a third hand? A third eye? But anyway. Back to, they described that the method, if you're sold on the pitch from some school, some discipline, what we want to do is to calm the mind. That is the stage. We have got to set that kind of stage for any sort of, whatever they want to call it, a satori, an awakening to a higher level of consciousness, the enlightenment, the Buddha mind, to awaken to the Christian, to the mind of Christ, whatever they want to call it. They describe it and it strikes everybody as correct. And I'm not naysaying that. As they say, we've got to in some way get you free from this going on. You've got to be aware that it's just going on and on and on. You go, well, yeah, and most people are not even aware of that. They take it as being them. But you go, you realize that it's not helping. You go, well, I'll agree to that at least. We have got to in some way calm that. We've got to stop that to let something else speak to you. That reality is out there, the Buddha mind or the higher state of consciousness is here. It's just seeing reality. It's just hearing reality. It's just being able to think reality in another way. And you go, okay, but we've got to stop this. It's like your eyes are going around. Or it's like the waves on a pond and you're underwater and you can't get a good glimpse of it. Okay, I got it. That's right. That's true. What I do? And of course, they don't know how to do it directly. They say, all right, we have exercise. We have our own discipline. And they'll throw in a few other things, as you know, maybe dress a certain time or be here at a certain time, maybe give up certain foods. But the main thing they say is we sit because we've got to still the body. Because to still the body is more conducive to stilling the mind. And any sane person would go that far. You go, yeah. And so there you sit. No offense to the hobby, but as I said, that doesn't ever strike anyone. I'm asking you rhetorically. That someone faithfully has been doing some sort of discipline, say involved with meditating, with sitting. And you say, well, how long have you been doing it? They say, 30 faithful years. It doesn't strike them that, well, refer back to my own story of the man who heard some sort of exhortation, some sort of encouragement from a teacher that said, well, remember, from here to Shangri-La, from here to China, from here to Rio, is done one step at a time. Until quickly in his little mind, if not pocket calculator, he figured the distance from here to China and thought, geez, I should live so long. Instead of going somewhere to sit, I forgot I was going to make it simple. I said try. Instead of going somewhere to sit, to meditate, to get in just the right position, it can be a nice hobby, it can be relaxing, so can drinking gin. Instead of that, the sitting, the whole thing of the posture, the whole point of a stilling is right here, right now. You didn't like the guy tonight who said he was beginning to think, wait a minute, maybe it goes like this. If my mind is the maypole, and the collective's expectations or the reality of the collective mind is their 5th month of the year, then what I got to do is grease those ribbons I've been wrapping it in. For those of you who don't know the maypole, I keep dancing around it and wrapping this. What's the greasing? Those of you with good ears know I've been slipping that in for the last 6 or 8 meetings. It's just another version of stilling the mind. Greasing it.
Right, back to where we started tonight. Everything that the mind normally does is an attempt to affect consciousness, to change consciousness. Let's make it a Daffy Duck form of logic. Here we go. Everything that the mind ordinarily does is an attempt to change consciousness. That's the first statement. Second statement is, to any alert mind, to any alert sight, it is a dismal, abject failure. It cannot do it. Okay, we've got two good premises. You did say anything. Yes. Don't take my word for it. Can you think your way out? Can you change the TV shows you watch and become more conscious? Can you change what you read and become more conscious? Or if you like what you are reading and think, well, I'm on the right track, can you double the amount that you're reading about whatever it is and become more conscious? Not unless you're ordinary, and then you go, well, I'm getting closer. Yes? It's known as corpse maggots. It was under a different guise tonight. The calming of the mind you can do right at this second, except it doesn't seem to be the calming of the mind. What I was going to try to ask you to consider is, it is the refusal to hold on to anything that the mind does. Right this second. You mean, yep. Yeah. Oh, no, you choose, yep. That is the stilling of the mind. And you don't have to go sit. Going sit, you can spend 30 years, that never happened. Doing this, I can't say that won't ever happen, but at least you didn't have to sit for 30 years. Plus, if there's anything to you, a little more quickly, you realize there's nothing I can do to my mind to make it more conscious. And then you can ask yourself, then you can start doing go, did you say nothing? And then you can say, what, are you deaf? Because you get good, you don't answer. You just hear, or you begin to realize there's nothing going on in my mind. Nothing. There's nothing it will do. There's nothing it can do that will in 1 iota increase my consciousness. Now, that's the charitable way to put it. You put it that way, and your mind immediately goes. It cannot help it because it's life. It is the energy flowing up through the planet, through your feet, keeping you alive. It immediately questions it. It debates it. It finds exception. It makes some comment in response. If you make any response to its response, you're back doing the dance. And you will try to figure, well, wait a minute. There is no minute. If you see that everything the mind normally does, that's talk, and that all talk is a mechanical, unnourishing attempt to change consciousness, and then to see, well, it does not work. This is not the change I want. All it does is distract me. I go from one channel to another. Go to another channel.